Good evening, folks. John Cantera here, the Double Broker Bounty Hunter, and welcome to the Double Broker Bounty Hunters Stop the Scam. My partner in crime, Dispatch Kate, is not available today, so it'll just be my mug that you'll be staring at. But we've got some important information we want to kick out. So this will be a shorter episode than usual, but we do want to get some information out. And if anyone has questions on it, you can feel free to go into the comments section and post your question. And if we're still live, we'll go ahead and get to it and get you an answer. Otherwise, send us your questions to my email at dbbh.hotline@vigilanttransport.com, and I will be happy to provide you any information that you need. And Kate's email is also on the screen there for you in case you have any issues that you need to take up with her as well. She's well informed about all this stuff as I am. So I'm going to go ahead and get into this information here for y'all. And yeah, I know there's a little slideshow involved here, but hey, as long as you're not just staring at me, then I feel a little more comfortable. So let's go ahead and get into some of the things here. The issue that we've come across in the last week is a new double brokering scam that is primarily centered around brokers. And brokers can get taken under this new scam by a massive amount. We're going to break down through today's episode the basics of double brokering and include in some of the latest scams that exist, just as a refresher course for some folks out there. Here's Kate chiming in. and she is definitely right. We are being bombarded with MABE stuff. In fact, I've just gotten hit with yet another major investigation that I'm jumping into. But I'm not going to be talking about that one until we get that cleared up. So yeah, there's a lot going on that we're trying to tackle. So what we're going to do is break down the basics on the double brokering for those who don't already know. So you know what to be looking for. And as we go through this discussion, we're going to pepper in the new scam that exists so that brokers can be aware, because this is really going to hurt you guys in the future if you don't pay attention. So let's go ahead and get through it real quick. As y'all know, basically what double brokering is, it was originally started off as a practice between carriers, primarily interlining back in the day for those who have been in this industry for a long time, and has evolved so that in the last couple of years, we're now talking about people who are fraudulently acting as carriers or brokers within the industry for the purposes of double brokering. So that definition has evolved over time, and you're going to see the laws show the evolution of these as it goes through. Now, what I've had a lot of people ask me, why is double brokering actually illegal? What makes it illegal? And that is Public Law 112-141, otherwise referred to as MAP 21. That is what makes double brokering an illegal act. It effectively ended the practice of interlining between carriers, and that requires carriers to have a broker authority in order to be able to do anything like that. And it formally made sure that all brokers out there are properly licensed and bonded as it's defined under 49 CFR 371.2. This is what really throws everything under the bus here. If you get caught double brokering, boom, $10,000 fine. Okay, and that's per occurrence. So if you're ever reported to Department of Transportation for double brokering, that's what you can be facing if you are found guilty. What we've been seeing lately is not so much the domestic stuff, but the international stuff. And don't get me wrong, There's plenty of domestic fraud going on too, which we've talked about, such as with MABE. Uh, it's all out there for you. Really, it became prevalent in the start of this decade, where international scammers have been creating these different rings to perpetrate these frauds. We saw the evolution of financial centers being created to finance this. Back in 2021, it was Royalty Capital who was really driving that stream. And in 2022, they were replaced by Crossroad Services, who is still around today and known as the financial arm of one of the largest double brokering rings that ever existed, referred to as RIGS. That's RIGZ. So one of the things that I can very conclusively tell you all is, if you get involved as a broker, you have a carrier that uses Crossroad Services as a factoring company, it's a scam. Just telling you that right out the gate. If you are a carrier and you go to book a load with somebody and they want you to do a setup through the RIGS platform, that's gorigs.com, it's a scam. Okay, once you as a carrier go through the GoRigs process, the RIGS system, their TMS, now has all your documentation. So that puts you in a position of having your identity stolen by these scammers for committing further fraud. So please keep those two names very important in your mind: Crossroads Services and RIGS. Now, I was lucky enough a year ago to sit in on a conference call with a scammer out of Eastern Europe. And he was a U.S. expatriate who was actively involved in double brokering. And he explained the scam from start to finish. So this is how it started back with these groups financing it. And that basically, if you check all the blocks that FMCSA has for creating an authority, you're getting the authority. There are no barriers to entry, and that's by law under the Motor Carrier Act of 1980. So as long as you check all the blocks, boom, you are in. You got your authority. Okay, so for a carrier authority, you got to have an organized company. That's an LLC, INC, whichever recognized entity within a state. Then you have to get a VIN number. And what these guys were doing is they were collecting VIN numbers out of scrap yards. And even though the truck may not exist and all you have is this VIN number, they would then get somebody to put together an annual DOT inspection. And what this individual was telling us is that they were paying for these inspections by bribing mechanics who were certified as DOT inspectors. So once you have the inspection, now you've got what you need to obtain insurance. So these scammers would obtain real insurance for a fake truck that on paper exists but really doesn't, just so they can get that insurance document submitted to FMCSA, and boom, you now have an authority. Okay, and that's all you got to do. You got to check the boxes. That's it. Once they get their authority, then they start working on the broker authority. And the broker authority is even easier. Okay, again, you got to have a US-based company established in some state, an LLC, an INC, whatever. Then you go ahead and get a bond from a legitimate surety provider. That's a $75,000 bond, thanks to MAP 21. But a $75,000 bond you can still get for, what did I hear? I think I heard $2,000 is the down payment you have to have on it. You just have to be able to prove that you have the assets to cover it. And okay, that's all fair and good. The important part is there's real money being spent to create these authorities. And once you have these authorities created, you're in business as a scammer because you have legitimate authorities to be able to do whatever you need to do. So now let's break down the individual types of scams that exist. And the first four we already know, we talk about them all the time. It's the last one that's spanking new. the skim off the top and the end game. This is the traditional items, the traditional double broker scams that have been in existence for a while now. We'll break those down. An offshoot of that is the too good to be true. It's just like the end game, and we'll break that down as well. We started seeing the too good to be true a little more than a year ago, maybe more like a year and a half ago, especially when the markets really started getting depressed on rates. Well, the scammers weren't able to skim as much off the top, so now they just decided to take everything. The evolution then went to a year ago in March 2023, impersonating the carrier, and we'll explain how they've done that, to in June of last year, impersonating shippers. I mean, these guys have gotten so damn creative at this stuff. If they were half as good at being scammers, they'd be outstanding brokers or outstanding carriers in their own right. And the new scam, we're calling it the ghost load. And this is absolutely diabolical, but we'll break all these down real quick. So back to the traditional, the skim off the top. This is when you have a legitimate broker with a load, sells the load to who they think is a legitimate carrier, but it's actually a scammer. That same scammer also has a broker authority who then rebrokers the load to a real carrier. So now in the middle, you've got this scammer who's operating both as a scam carrier and a scam broker to make sure that there's an easy flow of communication. Remember, this is all about a smoke screen, and you keep that smoke screen up in the middle so that the real carrier and the real broker have no idea what's going on. But the information needs to flow freely between the two to make it look like the scammer is actually hauling the load. And that's always been the trick. The reason why these guys have been able to get along for as long as they have is because they actually still pay the carrier. If the load really paid $1,000, then usually they're going to skim about 25% off the top. So they may have sold the load as a scam broker to the real carrier for $750, but they will pay the real carrier that $750. And that's really the big difference between what used to happen on the traditional side versus what's happening now. Okay, so to summarize that, the scammer is going to get paid the full rate by the real broker, but the scammer will pay the real carrier how much is promised, which is roughly 25 to 30% less than what they were getting. So then you have end game. So as they hit the end of their life cycle, they've been discovered too many times. The scammers know that the jig is up. FMCSA is finally about to shut them down. They go for a cash grab. And instead of posting loads for 20 to 30% less than what they were getting from the real broker, they're now going to post those loads for 20, 30, 40, 50% more. And all they want is a sucker to book those loads. Because when that sucker books the load and hauls it, they're not going to pay at all. So end game is a cash grab. But since last year, when the market really started to tank, there wasn't enough money out there for them to skim off the top. They went straight to the end game. So we call it too good to be true. So the best thing for a carrier to know about this process is if the rates are, well, too good to be true, and we mark that at 20% above the normal market rate, the spot market rate, then you need to stop and you need to be thinking about this, because you could be setting yourself up for a fall. So keep that in mind. And so to summarize that, you've got the scammer getting paid in full, but they ghost the carrier entirely. Okay, carrier does not get paid. So the carrier then has to resort to filing a claim against the shipper in order to get paid. Well, in starting to file that claim, that's when they find out who the real broker is. And both the shipper and the real broker are stuck in a position that we call double pay liability. We spoke about double pay liability last week for those of you who are watching. But basically, the carrier must always be paid. So if the broker or the shipper pay the scammer, then they're on the hook to then have to pay again to the real carrier. So it's very important for brokers to watch out for this particular type of scam, because they are not they're going to suffer just as much, if not more, than the carriers are. And carriers, if you got suckered into a scam like this and you haven't been paid, that's what we're here for. You can still get paid. Even if it's been 18 months in the past, you can still get paid. Reach out to us and we can help you get that squared away. So now let's get into the carrier impersonation. This is where it really starts getting interesting. Back in March of last year, FMCSA and DOT had a data breach. Now, officially, they indicated that it was just federal employee data that was compromised. And we now know that that's not true. What actually was compromised were DOT PIN numbers. So anyone who had a DOT number as of a year ago who has not changed their DOT PIN number, your data has been compromised and your authority is susceptible to being literally stolen by scammers, because your DOT PIN numbers are available on the dark web right now. We have seen this happen to a lot of carriers. So carriers have gone and fixed this. Brokers are under the same threat. So please protect your authority. Get yourself a new DOT PIN number. If you've already been compromised, update your MCS 150 first, then request a new PIN number. But you have got to get a new PIN. So when you have a situation of carrier impersonation going on, you have a perfectly good carrier who knows nothing about what's happening. The scammer is using that carrier's information to book loads and run those loads. But instead of going through a factoring company or anything, and this is one of the tips for the brokers out there, they're asking for quick pay. Because once you pay the scammer the quick pay money, they're gone. They're in the wind, and you're never going to recover that. Whereas if you're trying to go through a factoring company, there are ways to get that money back from a factoring company for at least a month ahead. So these guys will not run with factoring companies unless we're talking about Crossroad Services. So again, there's that name. The basic impacts that come from that. The impersonatory carrier does not know it's happening until it's too late. The scammer is going to get paid by quick pay, usually to a separate account. So again, the real carrier has no idea it's going on. The real carrier who actually hauls the load doesn't get paid. So when the real carrier says something and figures out who the broker is, well, the first thing a broker does when they figured out they've been scammed is they figure out, okay, what MC number did I book that load with? Okay, file a freight guard on that bastard for double brokering. All of a sudden, this innocent guy is wondering, wait a minute, what am I getting 10, 12 freight guards for? Because your authority's been stolen and they've been double brokering on you. So this innocent guy is taking the fall for having his authority stolen. So not only are you dealing with freight guards, but if these gets reported to DOT, then he'd be facing $10,000 fines per occurrence and revocation of their authority. I mean, it's diabolically devastating for carriers. Well, they've taken it a step further about 3 months later to impersonate shippers. They would act as a manufacturing company or any other kind of shipping entity to try to draw new brokers specifically in. Your small brokers who have not been in business for very long, usually less than a year, they try to draw them in, and this broker thinks, hey, I got a new customer. We want to make sure this customer is taken care of. So the scammer is going to ask for very favorable payment terms. You have net 30, net 60 days. And what that does is that gives the scammer a 30 or 60-day window that they can freely scam the hell out of this broker. And in the end, they're going to ghost the broker, and the broker's going to be stuck with all of this money they have to pay carriers. And they're not going to get any of it back. So it, again, another diabolical scheme that's been put together through this whole double brokering process. So you have basically, you have the original load, okay? The original load is then booked by the scammer as a carrier. They then hand that load off to a second broker, the broker they've been cultivating. They're going to say they're the shipper. And then that broker is going to hire the real carrier. The real carrier hauls the load, then gets paid by the second broker. Paperwork gets sent from the second broker back to who they think is the shipper, but is really the scammer. The scammer then sends the paperwork to the real broker, gets paid by the real broker. And then the second broker in the middle, not only do they not get paid, but they are also now on the hook as an unwitting double broker, facing $10,000 fines per occurrence, facing revocation of their authority, and the amount of economic damage is absolutely extreme. We have seen hundreds of thousands of dollars in economic damage over this in the last few months by single brokers. It's absolutely devastating. Now, let's fold in the new one. I want to go ahead and zoom this in a little bit better so everyone can see this and understand it. The ghost load. This is a variation of the shipper impersonation scam. But in this particular case, there is no real load. There is no real cargo. It is simply a paperwork exercise that the broker that's been cultivated is going to end up paying for. So the scammer just acts as a shipper and says, hey, broker, I've got a load for you. And they send the paperwork for this load. Remember, the cargo doesn't really exist. But one of the requirements the scammer has as the shipper is they want to approve any carrier hauling cargo. So when the broker goes and tries to find a carrier, the scammer is also posing as carriers in order to book the same load. So you have the broker in the middle trying to find a carrier. The scammer has the load as the shipper. The scammer is also trying to compete for hauling the load as the carrier. So when the broker presents the carrier information to the scam shipper is only going to approve the carrier that they control as part of the scam. So then, on paper, the load gets moved, signatures are put on a BOL that's created by the scammer, and then presented back to the broker in the middle to pay the scam carrier. And then all of a sudden, the scam carrier gets paid, and the broker in the middle, again, left holding the bag. It is absolutely diabolical. We only heard about this scam just this week. Okay, so again, you have the scammer on both sides of the equation as the shipper and as the carrier, with an innocent broker in the middle just trying to help cover a load. And that broker will pay the scam carrier, send the bill to the scam shipper. Scam shipper never pays, but they sure as heck already paid the scam carrier. The broker did. Diabolical. So with that new scam out there, you got to look for all the warning signs. And these warning signs are universal across all the different double broker scams that exist. First, carriers. You need to be looking for loads that are not factorable. Now, I love DAT because DAT has that blue check mark on there that indicates that a load is factorable through OTR factoring. Now, if OTR will factor it, that broker's been vetted, it's usually a sure bet that they're not a scammer. Usually, and that's assuming that the scammer's not impersonating the broker, because that happens too. But for all intents and purposes, if that blue check mark is there, it's factorable and it's less of a concern of that load being a scam. If you have to set up your carrier through RIGS, RIGZ, again, 99.9% sure that is a scam. Do not trust it. Don't move any further. And if you do, you need to get in touch with me, because I can help you get through that so that you can actually get paid. Another warning sign is if the broker forbids contact with the shipper or the receiver. No broker in their right mind is going to do this, because carriers, you have got a right to verify your information that you get from a broker. You have a right to call the shipper and verify, hey, shipper, is broker XYZ the freight broker for this load? Be very careful when you do this. Though you're allowed to ask that question, what you cannot ask is about money. Doing so then puts you in a position where you are conducting what's called back solicitation. And every broker agreement that I've ever seen, back solicitation is one of those things they can come back and sue you for. So don't ask a shipper or a receiver about money. Just ask, who is the freight broker for this load? And, and confirm your pickup time or delivery time. But that's about it. You don't want to ask anything else. Otherwise, you put yourself in a legal gray area, and you don't need to be there. But any broker that forbids all contact with the shipper or receiver, be suspicious of. If the broker also directs you to check in under the broker's company name, that's another red flag. Now, I know of lots of brokers who will sit there and say, hey, check in as us. Most of the time, it's innocuous. Most of the time, it's innocent. But under the rules for writing BOLs, the carrier name should be the carrier name, not the broker's name. The broker should appear in the third party section of a BOL. Commonly in the industry, it's recognized that people don't do that, so it's not something that's actively enforced. But keep in mind that if they ask you to check in as somebody other than yourself, there could be a problem. Not always, but there could be. If the rate confirmations that come from the broker lack detail, that's another big thing. That rate confirmation should give you all the information that you need to be able to pull that load. It should have a pickup number in there. It should have all the details about the cargo in there. It should have everything. If it doesn't, there's usually a reason why that data has been omitted. Think about that. If a broker is aggressive in their tone and the frequency of update requests is probably another huge flag, almost as big as being part of RIGS. Brokers typically are the ones that write BOLs. Sometimes the shippers do, but brokers are the ones who typically write those. So when you go to pick up a load, the broker already knows what's on the BOL, so they usually have a fair idea of how long it takes to get loaded. They have a fair idea of what the timing looks like. They may want updates as you're making your way to the pickup, and it's responsible for a dispatcher or a carrier to keep a broker informed of your progress. Hey, broker, we're on our way. We'll be there in an hour. Hey, broker, just FYI, we've arrived. Or, hey, we were loaded and rolling as of 10 minutes ago. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Simple updates like that are good. Brokers love that. Brokers use that to develop trust with carriers. Well, the scammers know this. And since the scammers know that, they're going to bombard a carrier with requests for updates and then push those updates back to the real broker. Again, trying to build trust with that real broker. This scammer wants to be able to keep booking loads through the real broker so they can double broker them over and over and over and over again. And the more they build that trust, the better off they're going to be. Just this week, I was dealing with a broker who, I kid you not, has been working with this scammer for over 7 months. But he's gotten away with it because he's still paying the real carrier. It's only because our staff was diligent and they saw the issues on the BOL enough to ask the questions that it was discovered that the broker that we were dealing with was a scammer. And we informed the real broker as to what was going on. He's like, man, I've booked over 100 loads with this guy. I was like, well, dude, then he's stolen money from over 100 carriers. You got to know what you're looking for. But these brokers, these scammers can be very aggressive in their tone too. They're going to demand those updates, not just ask for them, but they'll demand them. You got to watch out for those kinds of things. I've already started talking about the BOLs, about pickup and delivery. Told you, the broker typically writes those BOLs themselves. Why do they need a copy of the BOL when you pick up? They usually don't. So if you have a broker who is trying to really dig into you to get a copy of that BOL as soon as you pick up, you should be asking questions. Actually, what I tend to do is I tend to tell those brokers, yeah, my driver's going to send me a copy of the BOL when he stops for fuel. And that gives me a few hours to investigate it. So I can, if they are a scammer, I can go ahead and bust them. Another sign is if the broker lacks knowledge of U.S. geography. Now, we all know that a lot of these scammers operate from overseas, particularly Eastern Europe, India, Pakistan. This is where we're seeing these dispatch farms that do a lot of this double brokering work. If they don't have a good knowledge of U.S. geography, that's a sign. Now, granted, I may not know what one tiny sleepy town in Texas is and how far away it is from a sleepy town in Oklahoma. But I do know that Boston is a hell of a lot more than 4 hours away from Chicago. And I had a broker sit there and try to tell me I had 4 hours to get from Boston to Chicago once. Okay, so if I had a Formula One racer on a flat track and no traffic, I couldn't make that. But that's neither here nor there. If English is not the broker's native language, and I got to be very careful when I say this, okay, I have absolutely no issues with immigration whatsoever. I love immigration. I think it's a fantastic thing that this country stands for. But we also know that the majority of these scammers that are operating under organized rings are operating out of Eastern Europe, Pakistan, and India. So if you hear those accents, doesn't mean that it's a scammer, but you should be looking for other warning signs. If the BOL and the rate confirmation have differing details, I've had a lot of people come to me about different loads, what they call blind shipments. And in blind shipments, they're typically used as consolidations. And these blind shipments are going to require a driver to take the BOL that the shipper gives you, throw that out, and just use the BOL that the broker emailed you. Sometimes, most of the time, that's an innocent and innocuous situation. I never throw out the original BOL. I keep it just in case there's a problem. And I would suggest you do the same. However, this is very often utilized as a tool for cargo theft. So if something else doesn't smell right about the load and you're dealing with one of those types of cargoes, I would say something to your dispatcher and start digging into this much deeper, because you could be unwittingly involved in a cargo theft scam. And we've stopped some significant cargo theft issues. We had a load of copper once going on a flatbed from Indiana to North Carolina. Well, the BOL that the broker provided took it to Southern California. So the driver went to Southern California. We were able to recover all the cargo, which was an absolute miracle, but it's only because the driver kept the original BOL and we were able to trace that load back to the original broker. And the original broker was then able to get the authorities out to be able to go and seize the cargo so that $300,000 worth of copper didn't wind up in a scrap heap. And that is where they found it, in a scrap yard about 40 miles away from the delivery location that was provided by the scammer. So it was amazing that we were able to recover that. The last big warning sign for carriers is if the rate is abnormally high or low. I've mentioned this before, but when you look at spot market rates versus where you are in the country, you need to know what that general rate in that area is. If the rate you're being offered is significantly different, it doesn't mean that it's a scam, but you should be on your guard. Now, I've been going off about carriers and what they need to look for. Brokers, you need to be looking for a bunch of stuff too. And if there are any shippers watching, this is important for you to know as well. Brokers, if the carrier comes to you using Crossroads Services as a factoring company, just right away, that's a scam. Don't even bother with them. If you have a carrier, when you're doing your checks on them, if their MCS 150 is really, really new, that should be a warning flag. Doesn't mean that there's a problem, because remember, carriers are required to update their MCS 150 biannually. So they're going to have updates. And that update could have been in the last few days. But if it has been very recent, try to do a little bit of deeper checking, because it could be that the authority has actually been stolen by a scammer through the safer network, using those DOT PIN numbers that were compromised a year ago. If they have prior reports for double brokering on any of the reporting services that are out there, and of course the most popular being Carrier 411, you also have Carrier OK out there, Carrier Assure, Highway, Assure Assist, which is My Carrier Packets, and RMIS. They all have reporting tools associated with them to help identify potential scammers. It doesn't mean that they are a scammer, but it does indicate a potential for a scam. Again, if you see that out there, dig a little deeper. Authority age, this is one of the things that as a dispatcher, I really disagree with this requirement that a lot of brokers have. However, authority age is a decent discriminator when it comes to identifying potential scams. We all know that these scam carriers can't exist more than a year, because they'll never go to their initial audit. And if they don't make it to their initial audit, the authority is going to get trashed anyway. So you'll never find a scammer that's more than a year old. But look at that more in relation to inspection history. If you have a carrier that only has one truck, you can go a year, sometimes 2 years, and not get an inspection done, because these inspections are done by random. You can't just pull into a weigh station these days and get a DOT cop to go and do a level 2 inspection on a truck on a whim. It's actually very rare that you can do that anymore. So it's quite possible that a real carrier doesn't have an inspection. But if they've got 10 trucks and 2 years of service and they don't have an inspection, now things are looking a bit more unrealistic. So you got to weigh the authority age relative to the inspection history that they have. And that will give you a more clear idea as to if you're working with somebody who's real or legitimate versus a scammer. Another thing is lack of contact with their dispatch or the driver after the load is booked. Particularly on the stolen cargo type situations, once the load gets picked up and you are completely ghosted by the carrier, that's a red flag. As a dispatcher, I get really busy and I may not be able to provide regular updates to a broker during the course of the transit. Okay, but if a broker asks me for an update, I'm going to give it. Because I'm helping control that load. I'm trying to make sure that that broker maintains their liability responsibility to their customers. It's just good business. If they ghost you entirely, be worried. The last thing is requests for quick pay. That's why we have factoring companies. Factoring companies will pay a carrier within 24 hours, usually at a 2 or 3% fee, for that service. So if a carrier has to come to you and ask for quick pay, one, they either don't have a factoring company, or two, they're a scammer. And really, what a lot of carriers want to do financially is they want to get away from factoring companies so they're not paying that extra money to somebody just for the privilege of being able to collect within 24 hours. Ideally, a carrier wants to be so financially stable that they can go 30 days without receiving any income and be able to continue to operate while that revenue stream finally kicks in. Because most brokers pay net 15 to net 30. That should not be a problem for most. But until they get to that level of stability, most carriers are going to have a factoring company. So if you get a carrier, particularly a seasoned carrier, asking for quick pay, and you're usually factorable by the major factoring companies, I'd be asking the question. Defenses. Carriers verify it. Brokers spend a lot of time and energy verifying you. You need to verify them also. Don't just take everything you get at face value. Don't just take everything your dispatcher gives you at face value. You get to the shipping location, ask the shipper, who is the freight broker for this load? If you have the ability to call ahead and ask them, who's the freight broker for this load? If you're working with a large brokerage company or a medium-sized brokerage company where they've got different agents all over the country, you can call their corporate headquarters and you can ask them to look up the load number to verify that the load is real. There's a lot of different ways to verify this stuff, but remember, don't cross the line with the shippers and the receivers by talking about money, because that crosses the line into solicitation that is illegal. So please watch yourself. But verify everything. Brokers are doing it to you. You've got the right to do it to them. Brokers, I have seen massive compliance groups crop up at especially the large brokerages. Okay. And those compliance groups are good. They help. They make sure that all the regulatory stuff is being followed. That's all well and good, but it will not defend your brokerage from somebody who has stolen a good carrier's authority. The only real defense that a broker has to make sure their load hasn't been stolen is to make sure that your shipper puts their eyes on the side of that truck and records the MC number on the side. And you want to do this for two reasons. One, you want to make sure that it's the carrier that you booked. And if not, then two, you know who still has your cargo. You can then use their MC number to get their contact information, reach out to that carrier, and then get them signed up with you and give them a proper rate confirmation so that you still have control of your cargo and not some scammer. Because, what if they told this guy to go to Southern California and you think your cargo is going to North Carolina? The sooner you catch this, the easier it's going to be, the less money you may lose in trying to recover the cargo, et cetera, et cetera. This is a painful situation, guys. Everyone loses in these. So we need to minimize the damage. Pay attention to your defenses. And defenses are all manual, folks. The electronic stuff, they help, but they're not going to help you with impersonators. If you are looking at a new client, because we're seeing a lot of shipper impersonation going on now, verify that client. Ideally, you want to do a face-to-face meeting with them, okay? And them and their supervisor, to be frank. You want to make sure that you are dealing with real people. And then after you have that face-to-face meeting, call their corporate office, verify who they are. Verify details. Yeah, well, what was the name of that logistics guy you got in your office? The bald one. Yeah, the bald one with the brown eyes. I was on a conference call with them. And if they have no idea who you're talking about because all of their people happen to be blonde females, then there's not a bald guy sitting in their office and you're dealing with a scammer. Look, there are these little tricks that they may take a little bit of time, but a little bit of time is worth the investment to make sure that you're not destroying your company in the process. You get one of these shipper impersonators coming into you, you're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars in losses that you cannot absorb. So pay very close attention to this and screen everyone. Because remember, double brokering is a stepping stone to all the other major fraud types that exist in there: cargo theft, cargo ransoming, theft of authority, predatory brokering, predatory dispatching, theft of services by hiring owner operators and not paying them. All of this stuff stems from the double brokering realm. So if we can defend ourselves better from double brokering, all these other different types of scams on this list here will be reduced in how often they happen. I mean, heck, there are actually FBI task forces involved in some of these. It's gotten really out of hand. And the only way we're going to get this under control is us. So you've heard me drone on about double brokering for the hour. Again, I know you don't like looking at my ugly mug. I probably broke half of your computers, and that's perfectly fine. But we are here to help you if you get into a jam. If you're a broker, if you're a shipper, if you're a carrier, and you think you've been involved in a transportation fraud event, do not hesitate to reach out to somebody and get help. Okay, we can definitely help you. Email us at dbbh.hotline@vigilanttransport.com, and I'll be happy to get with you and try to get you squared away in any way that you can. I would also like to remind everybody, if you're watching this live, you already know. If you end up seeing this as a recording, every Monday, 5 p.m. Central Time, we're out here live for an hour talking about fraud in the industry. Myself and Dispatch Kate, we're here to try to help steer carriers, brokers, and shippers to do the right thing when it comes to dealing with these types of issues. So if you ever run into these problems, don't hesitate to contact us. That's what we're here for. So with all that being said, let me go ahead and throw up on the screen for everybody our contact information. If you ever need to email us, the email addresses are on the bottom of the screen. Contact us. We want to help. So for Dispatch Kate and myself, yeah, I know it's a short show, but we wish you all the best. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you guys again next Monday. Have a good week, guys.